Hey everybody, welcome to Psychedelics today with Joe and Kyle. We haven't done a video thing before, so we figured we'd try something new and interact with our you know, people through video. So, how's
Can't wait.
it going?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking us out.
I guess we figured we'd probably just do like a little check-in. We have about, what, 10 episodes out?
We might even have more.
More than that?
And yeah, we really want to know what you guys think. We've enjoyed the hell out of doing the project, and we've been getting some great feedback and some interesting media attention from Maps and other places. And Twitter is crazy. I didn't know that there were going to be that many people checking us out from Twitter. Did you expect that at all?
No, not really, because I use Twitter a tiny bit. I'm not a huge Twitter fan, but I just use it to post updates, and yeah, we've been getting some like really good tweets from Maps and stuff lately, which has been pretty awesome.
A ton of likes, a bunch of retweets. It's pretty sweet. And Instagram is actually pretty good too. Um, what surprised me the most actually is how many people are reaching out via email.
Yeah.
Like,
Some cool emails lately, which is really nice.
I'm sure in the future we'll have to be careful. Like, hey, I want to do psychedelic research with you guys. What do you exactly mean by research? And probably no is the answer.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, we don't do
Maybe
any of that stuff.
in 10 years, maybe we can do something different. But, breath work is legal and, substantially similar to psychedelic psychotherapy. So, perhaps that's the trick.
Yeah, and that's mostly our platform. It's breath work. So we don't do any sort of therapy.
Yeah, exactly. Psychedelic stuff is quite illegal. Though I am curious if people are ever going to, jump over to Portugal and really like use that as a Western country with Western type facilities for this research, it being legal at all. I don't know how much their medical system has shifted since drugs have become legal over there, but that would be an interesting thing to explore.
Is it
As a
fully
doctor.
legal, or is it just decriminalized for personal use? Because I think I something about their festivals, and how they're saying that it's decriminalized for personal use, but I think they're just spending more time trying to bust drug dealers and high level people.
Yeah, 2001 decriminalization.
Since 2001.
Yeah,
Wow, that's pretty.
14 years. It's quite the experiment. Seems good. Yeah, so we had emailed each other about some themes we wanted to talk about today. I guess the first one being, how do you get involved in this field? We've taken very different paths, and we've ended up here.
Yeah.
So, where are we? We're podcasting. We get to talk to these people. It's really, really fun. But it's taken a bit of work to get ourselves prepared to be able to have these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in it since roughly 2003, doing the breathwork stuff and philosophy training since 2001. So it's taken a bit of time to get here. So in a lot of breathwork sessions, a lot of reading, a lot of listening to podcasts, going to conferences and stuff. I feel like I'm ready to be able to talk to people about this at a more intelligent level. Like, what do you think, Kyle? Like, what your development was kind of starting with your snowboarding accident, leading into the transpersonal psych program, and then breathwork from there. What was it, a transpersonal psych undergrad?
Yeah, it started transpersonal, and then we had a new advisor, and then they wanted to bring Wilbur into it, so they switched it to a transpersonal program to an integral program. But I pretty much took the transpersonal route. My degree is technically integral psychology. That's what's on my diploma. But I usually just say I got a degree in transpersonal psychology because I didn't really get into Wilbur too much. I read like a book here and there. I was mostly influenced by Stan's work, and Stan is more from the transpersonal realm. But yeah, I started off with the near-death experience and kind of like my own self-exploration, and I got some books by Rick Strassman. I got Stan's book. And then, I decided I kind of wanted to study this stuff, and I just found a program. And then I stumbled across breath work. I went to a lot of conferences. I tried to network with people here and there. And that's kind of been my path. And since I am interested in psychology and counseling, I'm taking the route to get a graduate degree to become a counselor. Yeah, there's so many different paths to take to get involved in the field.
And your path in particular would allow you to actually facilitate phase 3 trials with MDMA. If and when you become licensed.
Yeah, that's the plan. Like, as soon as I get licensed, if MAPS can move forward with this and jump all the hurdles, yeah, that's kind of what I want to do.
Yeah, and there's so much room for everybody. There's so many different approaches. So we recently interviewed Neil Goldsmith, but we haven't released it yet. But contrasting him to Dimitri Moujanis is totally different worlds. One is a anarchist, leftist, recovering addict. The other one's a very successful psychiatrist. Or I don't actually know what is Neil. Is he He's a therapist or
a therapist? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So very different worlds, but in the same city, New York.
Yeah.
And there's room for everybody. There's room for a ton of philosophy, social criticism, critical theory. There's room for that, and all of it helps inform the final. Well, not even the final. Inform the process of this thing developing into something that's more integrated into our culture.
Yeah, and I kind of like what Ingmar said about, counselors and therapists and stuff like that aren't necessarily graphic designers. And hey, we need art. Hey, maybe we need an accountant. Like, there's so many different areas to approach this at, and I think it's important. Like, if you have an interest, just kind of attack it in any way. I think the main thing is just kind of having that interest and keeping it alive. I think just going out there and meeting people, you go to these conferences, and some of them are always like, go out and meet the others. And I think that's like the most important thing, is just go out, go to a conference, go to a place like Horizons. MAPS is having their psychedelic science conference come up in 2017. It's a great place to go. Symposia is always hosting these events, these psychedelic storytelling events, and now you're starting to see all these little chapters pop up everywhere. The Psychedelic Society, there's chapters in different cities. There's a psychedelic club. I think it started in Boulder, and now I think there's one in Chicago. So there's ways to even start your own chapters of these organizations, which is kind of cool.
One of the ways I made my biggest inroads was with Evolver, the New York media company partnered with Reality Sandwich, or co-spawned from Reality Sandwich. And I met a ton of folks. And then I was going to conferences and hosting my own events in Boston and Boulder. And I made a really great inroads into finding the community I wanted to find. Maybe that's part of it. It's like everybody's feeling alienated that wants to become involved in the field, not realizing that there's plenty of other people out there with very similar interests. And how dissimilar is it from like somebody with an interest in a specific car, like MGs or something, and they go to an MG meetup and they're like, oh, I get to talk to you about how annoyed I am with this particular part, or how psyched I am on that design feature. Yeah. And it's like, it's very similar. It's humans connecting with humans. And I think you might have saw this from this last weekend, but Lenny Gibson saying something like the core of spirituality is to have a personal relationship to the world, something along those lines, develop a personal relationship with the world.
Yeah.
And, it's not, you want to have these personal relationships with the field and with individuals and with all of it. The train that takes you to the conference, even, probably.
Yeah.
It's cool stuff. And we need accountants. We need business consultants.
That stuff. Yeah, it's like, hey, people might want to start up psychedelic businesses. Like who has a business degree that can help facilitate that? Because
Hmm.
I find that a lot of people that are interested in this stuff, a lot of us are dreamers and visionaries. I know for me personally, that's how I am. I'm always thinking, and I'm really bad at kind of putting things into action. So I'm like, hey, sometimes I need somebody to help motivate me or hold me accountable for those things, or might even just know how to do it, like get the process rolling. Um, so
Absolutely.
yeah, but I'm thinking about, like, this project that we got started. I think when we even began it, we didn't even have the idea of creating a podcast per se. We kind of approached this as if I remember, we just wanted to kind of record Lenny and Elizabeth's talk because we kind of wanted to make an archive of a breathwork training. And then
Hmm.
we were just trying to preserve our teacher like legacy in some sense and just their training material. And we recorded them first. And I know you and Lenny have been doing that for a while, recording his intro talks and this and that. But that's how we connected. You
Hmm.
we live far apart, and we just kind of connected through that, talking about wanting to kind of just, hey, we should kind of preserve this.
Sharing a teacher is a pretty big thing.
Yeah.
If it's sharing two teachers, both of them,
Yeah.
and even more so, it's kind of like that whole group. It's almost like a very specific community that we've shared, and we know a lot of the same people through it.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we didn't meet until 2016, we
Right.
had like a lot of mutual acquaintances. And who said that recently? The group being the teacher. That was Dimitri. Like kind of like a psychedelic anarchy.
Right.
The How do we step back from leaders and let the group be the thing that we treat as the parent figure or whatever? Like,
Right. Well, it's kind of funny you're saying that because I'm in a group work class right now, and just what you're saying, I know I just read something in like Yalom's book saying that like the group is the agent of change. The facilitator only has a small role. It's most, if you kind of can put the authority in the group and let them kind of figure it out, that's kind of where the change comes from.
mm,
But
yeah, if you see 12 people telling you something, that's very different from the relationship you would have to that information if it came from a single person or theoretically the leader of the group. It's cool. It's cool. So that that built our bond more rapidly than it would have otherwise.
mm-hmm.
I still have all that material from Lenny. I've been meaning to dedicate a number of hours to sorting through it and figuring out what to do with it. I think we should put that up somewhere, probably on their website, Dream Shadow.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome.
So perhaps, yeah, the answer to how do you get involved? Don't take any major drastic steps without going out and meeting some people.
Mm-hmm.
Go to a conference at least. It's a pretty lightweight step, and there's at least one per year on each coast.
Yeah.
But more than that, really. Especially if you look hard, you'll find the events that you need to go to learn more, and maybe try out breathwork because those people are also interested in very similar material.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, sometimes I go to these breathwork workshops, and I know that there's the psychedelic history with breathwork, but I don't expect a lot of the people that I meet to be really interested in the psychedelic component. And it always kind of blows my mind that I'm just like, talking to this like 70-year-old woman and, talking about, hey, I'm really interested in this and that. I'm like, oh, okay.
And you, as the young 20-something, can inform them on ayahuasca or inform them on mushroom stuff, and
Right.
or vice versa. Perhaps they've spent 15 years with the Huichol people or something like that. It's really cool, and often you're in these conversations till 2 a.m, like having a riveting conversation.
Yeah, so you don't want to go to sleep. You're like, hey, I want to stay up all night and talk about this stuff. Because, like, how often do you really find people in your community? I mean, I don't know, maybe you made friends with those people, but that you get to just stay up and chat about this stuff all night. It's, not very common.
Yeah, it's amazing too. It feels so good to have that kind of connection with somebody.
Yeah.
And I think that really should be part of the first step. And maybe also you just, because psychedelics kind of acknowledge that we have, well, by being aware of psychedelics and the psychedelic psychotherapy history and breath work and all this material, we kind of understand that all of us have material we need to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps one of the first things you do is start finding therapists too,
Mm-hmm.
to dig into your own material.
Yeah.
Or group therapy,
Mm-hmm.
because a group could be great. I really wish, I'm actually thinking about starting a men's group up here in my town,
Cool.
just to develop that kind of community. And so I have a group to work with, and people have a group to go to.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people won't go to a therapist. And
Right.
a group is a little easier, especially if it's called a men's group or something like that. And it's not on the face of it therapy.
Right.
Something different, something slightly different. I don't really know what you would call that. Call it a community, I guess.
Yeah. Or just a men's gathering.
There's this one in Boulder that I really wish was closer to me. I would be going to it weekly still. Yeah.
Self-discovery.
Self-discovery team.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was topic number 2? I can pull the email up here. Let's see.
I don't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, I don't know. I think like some of it also is kind of checking in about how the project's been going. You know, for me, I've never done anything like this before, and I know you have done podcasts in the past, and so yeah, I don't know. It's just like an interesting process. Like there's so many different ways to go about doing this.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, some people are like a lot more heavy with the edits, and you know, they have intro music. Some people are more minimalists. There's so many different ways to maybe do the intro. I mean, sometimes we're just very quick with it. You know, I know we kind of experimented with having a long drawn out talk before the intro, or before the thing gets started. Yeah, I don't know. There's just so many different ways to go about it. And I'm kind of curious to hear what our listeners think. Like, what would you like to hear? Do you want something a little bit more edited? Do you like the minimalist thing? Because in my mind, you know, we're kind of just going for content, right? We just kind of want to get some content out there.
Yeah, like my approach, like if people want the short stuff, like we can probably make that happen. And it probably won't be too hard.
Right.
My feeling is that long form content is never going to go out of fashion. Like Ken Burns documentaries aren't going to go out of fashion anytime soon. Well, maybe they're out of fashion, but they're very valuable and a lot of people value them. And having a conversation like this makes you almost, as a listener, makes you feel like you're there and in conversation with these people, and, you know, kind of in a sense communing with the people and not feeling so alienated. I found that with podcasts when early 2000s, mid 2000s, I was listening to a ton because I didn't have people talking about that stuff in my life. And it changed me in a way, like, oh, you're not crazy. Look at these 150 people that are interested in the same stuff and are very smart. And, you know, there's no end to the conversation they could have on the subject.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, I think there is value in short stuff. I just, you know, if you want to reach out to us, listeners, just tell us, you know, why you want it short, what kind of stuff you would like to see.
We're back. Something happened.
I was on a huge rant. Did it all cut out?
Yeah. I just paused the recording, so
all right.
We missed your rant.
Cool. But yeah, you know, why is it that you want a short podcast in short? And just let us know. We're really curious. And if there's people you want to hear from, let us know. If you want something on a very particular subject, like the pharmacology of MDMA, you know, neuro whatever, you know, how it works, what are the harmful things, how do you avoid serotonin toxicity, all that kind of stuff, you know, or whatever. Just let us know what you want to hear, and we'll try our best.
Yeah, and that just made me think too, like, even reach out with questions. Maybe we can kind of talk about have lined up, and maybe we can start asking
Mhm.
out to our listeners if there's any questions that you want us to ask.
Yeah, I've got this permaculture podcast I listen to, and this guy reaches out to his experts panel when questions come in, and he might not be an expert. So, like once a week, he'll have an expert on to answer one of these questions in depth, or a series of questions in depth, and it's pretty cool. And I think this kind of video forum would be really good to answer questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so one of the things I wrote earlier was in the email to you is about the shadow side of research.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's been a theme that's been coming up a little bit in our show.
Mm-hmm.
How do we become more self-aware of our blind spots, our biases when designing research or doing therapy or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Because what happens if you go a little bit too far out and you become Osho collecting Rolls Royces and assault weapons as a yoga guru all about peace and love and evolution of the spirit?
Mm-hmm.
Or the converse, you get just hyper atheistic and make your world kind of boring,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to something a little more magical. Science is awesome, but don't get locked into your world view being this 5-step, 7-step method or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There's life is more than a 7-step method. How many steps is it? 5, 7? I kind of forget. Hypothesis, testing, results. I don't know. Observation.
I think it's 5.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a scientist though. I love science, and I think bringing up the shadow side. I don't know. We're moving into such a weird time where people have this split between science and spirituality, and I studied transpersonal psychology, so I was more kind of in that spiritual side of the psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I've kind of had my foot working in the field with people, the science is important. I don't know. It's an interesting time because there's so many people that are like looking towards alternatives to mental health, alternatives to medicine. I feel like there's some people that feels like the traditional ways kind of failed them, or you hear it with like people going to see a doctor. They're like, the doctor spends like 15 minutes with me, doesn't hear my story, and then
Mm-hmm.
I just don't feel heard. And so I don't know. We're in this time where there's this weird split between people. We need the research, and yet.
Yeah. My criticism is not that we don't need the research. We absolutely need the research.
Yeah.
It's just that the research isn't the totality of the universe.
Right. Yeah.
And it never will be. 1,000, 10,000 years out, it's going to be an even better picture, but it still might not be the total. It'd be pretty cool if it was. I don't know what would happen at that point.
Yeah.
It's just the map in the territory, the Marshall McLuhan thing. Yeah, it's like
aren't the same, right?
I was talking to a trainer here in town. He's like coaching these high-end athletes, and his job really is to read every little bit of sports research that comes out and develop a training program for his athletes based off of that research.
Oh, cool.
And that's it. Like, how do you make the findings applicable?
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also these variables for the individual. What if you have how do you compensate if you're like me, for instance, and you need like all these surgeries to become capable of doing the training again? Mm-hmm. Or how do you do it for somebody with like a really rare disposition towards certain kinds of fats or whatever? Mm-hmm. So how do you make science fit into all these little subcategories of people? Because genetics are very diverse. Our personal experiences are very diverse. Mm-hmm. And
I kind of liked what our discussion with Catherine when she was saying, some of the maybe there should be somebody doing the counseling and the guiding, but necessarily not doing the calculus and the statistics afterwards and the analysis. I don't know. I wonder if that will ever kind of happen where, there's like split roles between research and stuff like that.
Yeah, like I don't necessarily think the therapist should be the one doing the research.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it should be like a big team,
Right.
and somebody driving the analytics off of that.
Yeah.
Because as a researcher, you're not necessarily the best therapist because you're more interested in your measures.
Mm-hmm.
I
And
think that's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been in that side of academia where I'm pursuing a PhD and doing science, so I don't really know how much or what the teams are like. Maybe
Right.
I shouldn't put so much speculation in how it works when I don't know how it works.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's really interesting. So like, what would be an example of shadow side that I was thinking about? Well, it's really hard, right? Because right now we're just trying to figure out how to get this stuff legal and prescribable.
Yeah.
And this current state has nothing to do with what it's going to look like once it's prescribable.
Mm-hmm.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Because so like, it really sucks that we're kind of biased towards researching on ourselves in Dimitri's terms, like 35 to 55-year-old people with their master's degrees living in the Baltimore suburbs or like in the downtown core. Like, those are the people that they selected. And, do we really want to beat ourselves up over that kind of oversight? Maybe for the researchers, it was I hate to say it, maybe it was the easiest population to work with. Like, but the research isn't there to help the people in the short term. It's there to get the research so that then we can then prescribe it.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe easier is better.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand, like, do we really want to help 30 white people, or do we want to help 30 people in a diverse population?
Yeah.
Obviously, we want to help everybody. That's the point of this research, is helping everybody. But it's, the shit's still illegal.
Yeah.
I don't know. How do you react to that? You're younger than me. Like, when you hear me say that, what are your thoughts?
Yeah,
relative to Dimitri stuff?
I feel like it's such a double-edged sword because I understand, well, because I am pursuing a degree, and I do think having that research is important, and who knows, maybe that's the only population that they could get, and that's what it is. But yeah, I don't know. I get fearful that it turns into it's just for people with money. I don't know. The diversity thing plays a huge role.
It's important, and we have to stay aware of it.
Yeah, we do. And I think this is a topic that's coming up a lot, and especially coming up a lot in my classes, is diversity and white privilege. And it's just something that I think we need to be aware of, that we have been the dominant culture for so long, and
maybe it's not just like we don't have to feel guilt all the time about it. Maybe it's that we just need to say, okay, let's remember that there are other populations out there. Wherever you're living, there are other populations that are underserved, underrecognized, maybe bigoted against and beat down regularly. So we have to stay aware and stay compassionate.
Well, I think that's it. I don't think it's about feeling guilty that you have this privilege. You don't have a choice on what color your skin is or what type of environment you're going to be born into. But I think it's just being aware and then doing the best that you can do to just better life for everybody.
Yeah, in my opinion, it's all about everybody. Yeah. But in the short term, there's minimal choice. Yeah. In the short term, we have to do what's lowest risk and highest reward so that we can push this stuff through and then serve everybody at a reasonable price. I'm optimistic that this will be covered by insurance.
Yeah.
other people aren't. Medicare probably also. Like it sounds like the PTSD thing will get federal coverage. The VA will pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why are they willing to pay for it? You know, maybe it makes war cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, they might not really necessarily care about the individuals, but the researchers out there understand that it's going to help the individuals.
Mm-hmm.
The researchers aren't there doing this research so that we can have more war.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Right.
you know, maybe that's why the Pentagon wants to fund it,
Mm-hmm.
or is interested in it.
Yeah.
But, you know, we're here to like push this stuff forward, evolve, and alleviate suffering from the human condition, and, you know, make life better for everybody, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, coming back to this kind of topic of like race and diversity, I always kind of come back to some of these cultures that have been around for so long that know about, they have like their own map of the territory, right?
Yeah.
And I feel as if, you know, our science kind of discredits some of that stuff because we don't like to talk about, like, say, the shamanistic perspective of mushrooms or ayahuasca. You know, we just want to know the clinical application, and I think that's the split between the science and the spirituality. And it kind of gets like tricky where it's like, okay, these plants or these medicines have been part of a culture for so long, and it's pretty much, you know, they have the stories of it and we're so new to it, and it's like, you know, we get a hold of it and we're like, oh yeah, we know everything about it, and we dissect it, and then it's almost, you know, I shouldn't generalize, but it's just like, we don't take the time to listen to the story of where these things actually come from, what it's used for. You know, maybe we do, but I think there's just like, I guess I'm afraid of the folklore and some of the story getting lost in the clinical application, because I think the story and the narrative behind these substances and these medicines is very important. Where humans, we operate off a story, you know, and yeah,
That's a valid concern. So, for instance, the stories that are 1,000+ years old about the characteristics of the plant spirit or whatever, and, you know, some legendary conversations that have been had between that world and the plant and the human, like that kind of stuff is, when it's prescribed, it probably will be lost. But I think there's a lot of people working on it to preserve that legacy in anthropological journals and books.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, like, look at Kathleen Harrison. You know, when I was doing some plant work, I was in Hawaii for like a course on shamanism and indigenous farming and stuff like that. And, you know, it was really interesting to hear her story and her experience with the Mazatec shamans. He was saying that in those cultures, they would eat the mushrooms in pairs, because then you'd be embodying masculine and feminine, and then they sing to each other. Whereas our culture, we are more concerned about the weight, you know? I don't know, stuff like that. And, you know, I went to, when she was giving her talk at the MAPS conference 2013, you know, she had this story about like how ayahuasca came to be, and it was like, you know, the dove, or the, you know, I don't remember it completely, but, you know, a white dove or a white bird came down from the Andes into the jungle and taught somebody how to make ayahuasca.
So it's almost like the San Pedro cactus coming down from the high altitudes to the jungle, informing that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe that's just my bias because I'm really interested in like anthropology, and I'm interested in mythology and story. I don't know.
I think it's important, and I think, you know, after Joseph Campbell, we understand the value of myth and story, and I think at least to some degree it will be preserved, because there's a lot of people out there working on it, and the trick is, how do we integrate it? To what degree is it important that we integrate it? That needs to be researched somehow. I don't know how you would do that, but you know, it's important to share these stories with people somehow. But in a clinical setting, 20 years from now, it's funny thinking about it in a white walled hospital room with like 2 paintings on the wall and like some flowers on a table, and you're serving ayahuasca to a patient. How do you share story and inform mythically to that person, like what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we going to rely on this plant combination informing the patient itself?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think in 20 years we're going to have about 50 to 70 ayahuasca documentaries that the person may have watched 4 of before drinking. That's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
But you never know. Maybe there's somebody in like.
Well, I guess that's a good point too. The story's always evolving, and we're coming up with like maybe a new territory. Maybe we are developing a new map right now.
We are,
Well,
absolutely.
I guess like what it comes down to is I guess my thought is, will there ever be like shamanistic integration in some sort of clinical? Is there some application of shamanism in a clinical setting, you know? I think LSD, MDMA, those are part of our cultural history. But things like mushrooms and ayahuasca and peyote, those are part of somebody else's story. Albert Hoffman synthesized LSD. MDMA has been synthesized. So I think those coming from like a therapeutic clinical aspect, that's fine, because those are the substances that we've created, and we're kind of creating that narrative for it. But
so on the Joe Rogan podcast, maybe 5 to 7 months ago, there was this pair of doctors who were administering 5-MeO DMT and iboga at their clinic in a shamanic context. And it was in like it's a little south of Tijuana, I think, on the Baja coast.
Mm-hmm.
It's not very deep Baja, but I'm trying to find their names right now. But it was pretty amazing.
I think I remember watching that, actually. Was it a documentary?
No, I think it was just I'll try to find it and we'll post it on Facebook later. But it was a great interview, and they were dealing with this stuff medically and at the same time shamanically. I don't want to not call the shamanic practices not medical, but Western allopathic, and then like a more shamanic singing with the plants type approach.
Right.
And they were doing both to improve safety and to improve efficacy, because the Peruvian Amazonian shaman doesn't necessarily fully understand what it's like to live in Los Angeles for 45 years.
Right.
Or New York City for 45 years. Like, those are very unique stressors, a very unique lifestyle that's not, it's not up, they don't understand it. So you kind of need both.
I think that's why I'm like kind of passionate about having both, is because after having a near-death experience and stuff like that, you kind of get opened up to a whole new world, and just like don't ever really, I guess, fully integrate back into what's supposed to be known. And, I've always had a hard time trying to express that or find an answer within like Western psychology. I mean, you can say, oh, maybe it's like the lack of oxygen and your brain shutting down, so it's creating all these like hallucinations or this feeling and this and that. And to me, that's not what it felt like. It felt like something. It felt more real than real. Like that reality that I was in was like more real than this physical reality. Like I was kind of leaving my body. I was having an outer body experience. What happens when people find themselves in those states during a psychedelic therapy session, if they're on high dose mushrooms and they're dancing with entities or, whatever it is, and there's no training in how to maybe help guide a person back from that, or
maybe that's where there's value. So right now what we're dealing with is a pair of people doing research, the Midhofers, who are trained by Groff on how to do this breathwork stuff. And breathwork was initially used as part of the training protocols. It might still be, might not be, but what that does is informs, like if the Groff transpersonal training that Groff was doing, I don't know what it's like right now, was included kind of in part of this therapeutic context, then you could kind of see how the individual therapist could relate better to archetypal mythic stuff coming up in people's sessions, and how to use that therapeutically.
Yeah.
Because maybe that's what we're missing. So when I hear about how we're doing kind of aftercare and active mid-session care, it sounds good, but it doesn't necessarily sound like how you would imagine a shaman to operate with a patient. Or I've actually watched Stan Groff work with somebody on the floor, and it was the most amazing, like rapid fire archetype myth call out to like, okay, now do this, and this came up, and then this, and then it just expanded into the most amazing thing. Roar, and then okay, that happened, and then just all this stuff unfolded for the person on the floor.
Yeah.
All through breath and like appropriate skilled coaching. I'm not at that level. I'm not somebody with 40 something years of psychedelic psychotherapy experience, but
right.
he's been around for a while, so he could do that. And that's kind of that shamanic elder kind of taking a role in helping somebody. What you would want a shaman to be able to do if you were in the deep Amazon,
right,
getting work done.
Yeah. And then I've had this conversation, I think with Lenny at some point, but it's like, how do you, okay, so what if you were to integrate like a shamanistic perspective, then like, how do you work with somebody, okay, so you drink ayahuasca, maybe it's like in their mythology, the serpent is this entity that you deal with, or this archetype. But what if you have somebody that comes from another cultural background who sees Buddha? So.
Or what about a Christian who thinks snakes are bad?
Yeah.
Snakes are of the devil. It's like the personal Gnostic experience is very complicated to deal with in these kind of sessions. And perhaps what it is developing, well, what I see the ideal future state being of this stuff is that people have communities of 100 to 120 people, and they do community medicine with each other somehow. I don't know what that looks like. I think breath work would be sufficient if everybody was in a healed enough state to be doing that. And then everybody knows each other's mythology.
That's actually kind of a cool vision for the future, right?
Yeah, like taking into account Dunbar's number. And like, we can't really appropriately deal with too many people, but you tone it down and we can. Maybe that's 500 years out that we're all in these specific pod numbers. Yeah, it's an interesting concept to deal with. Like, how do we do that? And we'd love to hear from listeners on what you guys think.
Yeah.
I probably would love to chat with you if you've spent some time thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely.
So, totally reach out. Yeah, huge question. And I think super important. Like, how do we want to do that? How do we want to consciously work towards that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think part of this project is to just start a conversation. Like, I don't think there are any right answers or this or that. I think it's just trying to get the community to come together to just talk about these things, It's a totally new area. I mean, maybe there is some stuff happening in the 50s and 60s, and then that kind of went underground. But, it's totally new, and we're all kind of exploring it together.
Did you see this article the other day that more people had used psychedelics today than in the 60s, in the last handful of years?
I didn't see that, but it probably makes sense.
Yeah, like the numbers are there. So it's a trend. I think, stuff's a little more calm than it was in the 60s. There's probably a lot more going on politically and culturally then. We don't have too much more culture stuff to rebel against.
Right.
We're almost at the bottom of the pit. We have plenty left to do, but it's not like it was before where everybody was repressed.
Right.
So perhaps that's the difference. And we don't have a Vietnam going, and we don't have the communist threat to worry about.
Mhm.
It's
Well, this
interesting stuff.
election is kind of nutty. I mean, we have to worry about that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a good segue into this one. How do we avoid blowback, federal government or international government blowback, and like shutting down of all research?
I asked Rick this when I saw him at one of the psychedelic dinners. It's like,
Hmm.
what if like something happens with the election where
Hmm.
the candidate does not believe in this research and just wants to like shut it down? He was like really optimistic about it and said, what's the worst that's going to happen? Like they serve their term and then we start back up again. And I was just
That's a
like,
great point. We didn't have to throw the research out. It was still appropriately double-blind and modern research.
mm-hmm.
And that's a great point.
Yeah. And I was just like, oh, okay, like, okay, what, it gets pushed back maybe like 8 years, 7 years or something like that. And then
We've already had to wait long enough, so whatever.
hopefully it just starts up again. And it's like we have all this research already done, and then you just pick back up. I mean, hopefully that doesn't happen. I think that some of these prestigious universities that are doing research, I mean,
Hmm.
that's a plus. I mean, who's really going to argue with research coming out of Johns Hopkins or NYU?
Yeah, and the other thing that I'd love to bring into this conversation is the global nature of research. Not everything is in America,
Right.
even though we as Americans want to feel that everything's happening here.
Yeah.
It's not. There's stuff happening in England, Switzerland, Israel, Australia, probably plenty of other places too. And we need to be aware that, say the big T gets in and shuts it down, and stuff is still going to progress in Australia, Israel, Switzerland, England, France, whatever.
Well, there's some really cool stuff happening over in Switzerland. I remember seeing Peter Gasser talk at Horizons, I forget, maybe like 2 years ago.
I didn't know you got to see him. That's awesome.
I went last, but it might have been 2 years ago.
He's really cool.
Yeah, but he was saying, he got like the green flag for like compassionate care for these stuff. So like if he gets somebody in his clinic that might, I don't know where it is now, but when I saw that, that's what he was saying. Like, he just got the green flag from the government to use it under compassionate care and kind of open it up, just not to research participants.
That's cool. That's great. And I remember MAPS Bulletin had a big article about that a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
And, say, for example, everything gets shut down. Why not have everything start up in Switzerland in the meantime? We still have the money to spend.
Right.
So just make it happen there. And Switzerland is pretty conservative in that they're not going to get influenced rapidly by these international pressures.
Yeah, and there's so much cool stuff going over at in London, with the Imperial College.
We've got to get David Nutt on the show.
That'd be fun. Or like Robin Carhart Harris. Anybody from that crew, really. I mean, they're doing such cool stuff. I'm not an expert in fMRI, but maybe we can keep up with some of the heady science.
The pictures seem to make sense intuitively just looking at them, so at least we've got that going for us. So that's cool that Rick is that optimistic. I think that's what helped him persevere through all his stuff. Is that, you just kind of have to take the obstacle. And
since the 70s, he's got to be somewhat optimistic if he's just bludgeoned for this long. He's just putting in the work. He's probably seen like a bunch of different politics and this and that, and
the book Acid Trip, we'll have the interview up soon with Tom Schroeder. It's unbelievable. Rick's struggle.
This book, Acid Test.
Yeah, that's it. It's so amazing. Rick's story that's detailed in that is unbelievable. And he, I liked the guy already. He was one of my heroes, but like he went up about 12 notches just looking at his level of perseverance that's been there through the decades. It's a crazy amount of single-minded focus.
Yeah.
And maybe that's it. if you want to find your way through the field, you just have to persevere through all sorts of obstacles. There's this book I read recently, a guy named Ryan Holiday, former intern for Tim Ferriss, wrote this book about stoicism and the modern world called The Obstacle is the Way. So just another obstacle, another hill to climb, and you're making progress eventually, assuming you're not doing crazy business and, I don't know, living ineffectually. And maybe that's it, just start slowly figuring out how to be more effective in your life. And working towards your goals and objectives and refining what those goals and objectives are.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with somebody the other night, but I don't know, we were just talking about life. But, just something that you just said about making progress is that, the progress that you make now doesn't necessarily, it'd be nice to see if we could make it, but I always think that we should live by doing things for the younger generations, right? Like there's that old,
we should also keep that into account.
Yeah, that like Native American proverb. It's like, what is it? We don't,
with every decision, take into account the next 7 generations.
Yeah, that, and it's like, we don't own the land, we borrow it from our grandchildren. And it's true, so it's like, what do we want the world to look like for our children and our children's children? And then, how do we just work towards that so they get
and to circle it back, how do we make our stories that we tell to people take that into account more often? How do we take a more holistic view of history and the future? And we are living out today what our history is, tomorrow, a year from now, 3 years from now. Our history is being written every day.
Right.
And, how do we want it to look? These are psychedelic insights.
Right. And I always think about like reincarnation. What type of world would you want to come back to if reincarnation is a real thing? Do you want to come back to a world that's just polluted and crappy and the politics are nutty? Why would you do certain things? Why would you pollute the water for you to come back to? And not everybody believes in reincarnation, but if it is real, we're creating a hell for ourselves to come back to. I don't want to come back if all the water's polluted and everything's gone, and man, that'd be not fun.
Absolutely. And I think I probably take it in a more sci-fi direction. It's like figuring out how to get extrasolar, figuring out how to get off planet,
right? Yeah.
To start with, and then there's a grand universe out there that might not be friendly. Asteroids, they don't have too much consciousness, so they're not going to go left or right. They're going to come right at us, and we have to get our act together on the planet, and then get our act together up there, and then we can kind of move forward if we want to think more big picture. Environment, extra environmentalists, and then figure out what the future of space exploration looks like. Well, inner and external.
Oh man, that's a conversation maybe for next time. But yeah, that's interesting conversation.
Because it's like Elon Musk, he's a pretty crazy dude, pretty rich dude, and he's highly concerned with the fate of the planet from external impact.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest imperatives is how do we keep at least human DNA going, if not all the DNA on the planet going. I think psychedelics inform sci-fi, like Dune. You've heard the stories about Frank Herbert's Dune, right? Yeah. And that was interesting. He who controls the spice controls the universe, because it helped them travel at hyperspeed. And another thing I really want to get into is microdosing. And I was thinking about it today. There's potentially billions or trillions of dollars on the left on the table due to creativity we haven't tapped.
Right.
Through, perhaps appropriate use of psychedelics for that, or even just regular creativity exercises.
Yeah, I know Lenny always kind of had that conversation with Stan whenever I'd go to breathwork, and he was talking about like the old research or the reemergence of the research.
Mhm.
And he said he had this conversation with Stan at one point and was like, isn't it great that this research is like happening? And, you know, Stan's like, yeah, I mean, it is, but it's all been done before. But he's like, you know, the real potential is tapping into human creativity, experience,
Mm.
how breath work and, you know, working with, as Stan calls, like technologies of the sacred, provoke and elicit creativity.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
there's a real human potential there.
Yeah, and maybe from like a Buddhist or Hindu perspective, figuring out how a lot of the population could become more happy or satisfied or content through the use of psychedelics, so that, you know, I would love it if I could figure out what's going on in here so that I don't want a mansion or Ferrari or something. How do I fix that?
Yeah.
Um, and that would be, I would love that, because that would save me a lot of money and a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
You know, if I want to consider it suffering, that's the Buddhist approach.
Mhm.
I don't know. You know, that's something that's important environmentally. I think that's one of Stan's big things, is that breathwork and psychedelics push people kind of through I don't know what kind of circumstances, but makes them more of an environmentalist.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of my breath work sessions that I've had, I mean, that's kind of what comes up. You know, it's like, take care of your body, take care of like what's around you, and you know, you don't need all these crazy fancy things. But who knows? Maybe that's just like my mythology that comes up, anyways, because that's what I believe in. But I don't know.
So maybe we can wrap here, and that, you know, are you cool with that?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Appreciate all of you listeners checking this out. It's pretty fun. Um, Reach out to us. What is it? info@psychedelicstoday.com.
Yep.
Yeah. We've got a Gmail, but use that one for now.
Mm-hmm.
Hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever.
We're out there.
Or YouTube now. This will be on YouTube real soon.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from everybody, see what everybody's thoughts are, see, you know, where this project can go. You know, there's possibly some thought about making some online courses and content and whatnot. So we need some feedback. We want to know how we're doing, how the conversations are going. So this project is for everybody, not just for us having fun, but we kind of want to engage the community a little bit.
Yeah, it's for you. All right. Talk to you soon, Kyle. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.